Uh, the way you handle yourself in the classroom, it goes a long way to establishing a rapport of respect. It's very important, I think, in the classroom to be comfortable, to be approachable, and to be friendly. You want your students to want to work for you. They shouldn't feel that there's a barrier there. Nonetheless, at some point in time, you have to establish that you are in charge of the classroom. Sometimes students will kind of step out of line. Maybe they'll get too loud. Maybe they'll come in late and be disruptive. Maybe they'll want to challenge you on a question. It's very important that while you be approachable, eventually you draw the line and say, I understand where you're coming from, but this is my policy, this is where I'm going to stand, and we can talk about it more later in my office if you would like to do so.
You know, a student starts out a semester thinking, you know what would be really great for me this semester is if I somehow had a problem in my class. They're not starting out that way. Some of them just might not be aware of some of the behaviors that aren't as acceptable in an academic environment, and they just need to be gently and firmly reminded of it. So the contents of my syllabus are very detailed, both in terms of the objectives that relate to the material in the course, but I also am fairly detailed about a variety of different things that relate to how disruption in the classroom. And so it's sort of anticipating what some of the issues might be and laying out what the expectations are.
I mean, again, it's all part of creating a climate in which all of the students have a right to be in that classroom for 60 minutes and be able to focus on the course content without interruptions and distractions. And that's part of my obligation as an instructor, and that's part of what I convey in my syllabus.
Because I really think that for a lot of students, whether it's academic integrity or it's with regard to classroom disruption, I just think there's a lot of things that they just need to be advised of, that we as faculty and instructors shouldn't assume that they know and shouldn't assume ill will or ill intention on their part. Maybe it's just a matter of them not knowing.
I find by virtue of having all of these policies regarding late assignments, regarding absences, regarding collaborative work and group assignments, that when there are problems, I can refer back to them, and the rest of the class is understanding and supportive of what's happening. And so they actually help police. They help monitor and encourage the appropriate kind of behavior.
In my conduct policy, I establish up front, I expect the students to be on time for class with their cell phones turned off. I expect that the students are going to prepare for class ahead of time and be ready to discuss things in the classroom. I tell students that I expect that if they're going to have a conflict or a question that might go beyond the context of the classroom, that they should do so in my office hours or send me an email and I can follow up afterward. I also tell them I expect them to respect other students, that anything they do in the classroom to distract the rest of the class I consider against the classroom conduct policy, and I may ask them to leave.
In a certain situation, that really what should be going through your mind is to de-escalate and diffuse. And I think that often we think of conflict resolution as a skill being saying the right thing at just the right moment, but really, it's a little bit counterintuitive, the greatest conflict resolution skill that you can have is to be a good listener. And that's something that I would encourage all faculty to work on and to at least think about, that in a moment, allowing a student who's becoming agitated or upset to feel heard and have their feelings acknowledged. And that doesn't mean you're agreeing with them. You know, it's very different than indicating agreement, but to really work on those listening skills and get into a listening stance as a way to diffuse and de-escalate maybe a situation that is, you know, unnecessarily kind of building steam.
Sometimes we'll have a pattern of bad behavior that develops in a classroom. You have one student that maybe they're disruptive, or maybe they're loud, or maybe they're not paying attention, or they're using their laptop inappropriately during class, and this becomes a habit that goes on and on for a few class periods. The first thing that I would do is pull that student aside at the end of class and say, I need to speak to you. This behavior is not acceptable. If I see it again, I'm going to ask you I'm going to either ask you to leave, or I'm going to take your laptop away, or whatever might be appropriate. If the behavior continues after that, the next step is to ask them to meet with you officially in your office, and I typically would do that in writing. The reason you do it in writing is because you want to establish a paper trail that you're having this communication with the student. The final level of communication would be to take it to the level of the dean. And at that point, if you can say, I've already spoken to the student, and I've already emailed the student, and I've talked to them in my office hours, then the dean has the ability to weigh in further. You can remove a student from your classroom if necessary, but it really is a last resort. And it's not something you do the first time something happens. It's something that you do after you've established a pattern and how you have responded to that pattern ahead of time.
I think it's important with some flexibility, you know, with knowing that it's never going to be the script, that it's always going to veer off in some direction that you don't anticipate, but to have some kind of broad brush sense of, if I ask the student to leave and they say no, then I'm going to do this. If I ask the student to leave and they leave, then my next follow-up step is to send an email documenting that this happened. You know, to kind of, you know, have your steps in order, I think is very important, because in the moment it's very difficult. You know, you're reacting often based on emotion and adrenaline and, you know, not wanting to be embarrassed in front of, you know, wanting to maintain your authority over the class. There's so many other interests playing in that in that moment you're not really able to, I think, you know, think of all the steps at that moment.
One thing that you need to remember as a faculty member is that you have the right to manage your classroom space. If at any point you believe a student's behavior is inappropriate and so disruptive that it's interfering with the learning that's going on in your class, you have the right to ask that student to leave. If a student resists, or if at any point you feel that a student is threatening to you or other students in class, don't confront that situation yourself. Immediately call the University Police Department by dialing 911. Our university police are outstanding professionals, and they understand the academic community in which we operate. In my experience, dealing with the university police is always a constructive, positive experience, and they help us get really good outcomes.
And so I think that the way that you manage the classroom also has to be something that you're comfortable with and you can integrate into the way that you're running the class generally. So at the moment where you are trying to address some disruptiveness, whether it's just low level and diffuse, or it's really just a few bad apples that's more of a pinpoint problem, there's a moment of confrontation. And so however you deal with it, you have to be comfortable with that, because, you know, it's kind of like the only thing you really have in that moment is your confidence.